again. This time we are talking about section 4.7, which is the changing social hierarchies of the era. And let's kind of get right into it with the Gunpowder Empires. And the big issue of the Gunpowder Empires, which those of you who don't remember, are the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals. The big issue was the warrior aristocracy. The warrior aristocracy or the military elite versus the absolute rulers that existed in each of these societies. That's kind of the large structure, and this isn't the only place that exists. We see it in Europe as well, but we're going to focus on the Gunpowder Empires right now. Specifically, we're going to really focus on the Ottoman Empire quite a lot here. And the other big issue within the Ottoman Empire is that warrior aristocracy, right? The Janissaries in particular, versus the bureaucracy, in the bureaucracy versus the ulama. The ulama being the kind of Islamic law scholars, right, who kind of really helped frame Sharia law, right? And so the Janissaries and the ulama were kind of at odds with each other, right? And in fact, what we're going to see with the Janissaries is that they're going to mount several rebellions, coups against the Sultan, right, to kind of gain power and prestige in their society, right? So as the sultans over time, as we've talked about in previous sections, become much more ineffectual, right? What we see happen here is that a new group of advisors come to the front, named Viziers. They gain a lot more power within society. And Viziers are advisors to the Sultan, right? And usually there's only one Vizier, and usually they're of Persian origin, Persian descent. A lot of times, Persians, again, being very well known for their government organization, right? The Sultan still has powers, but the Vizier gains a lot more power within court. So we have the Viziers, we have the Janissaries, we have the Ulama, and we have other military elite, right? There's a lot going on, right? One of the powers of the Sultan is the power of the Tamar, which is land or tax revenues that the Sultan can grant to who they like, right? Right, which gives them a lot of influence and power and can kind of keep people on their side, right? Keep them loyal, right? So in terms of treating religious minorities, right, we actually have tolerance for the most part. We have relative tolerance of minority religions in the Ottoman Empire, especially in relation to places like Spain. Oops. Really in all of mainland Europe at this point. And in fact, they talk about how the Sultan invited the Spanish exiled Jews to come to Istanbul, right? And they will contribute to society quite a bit, right? They become lawyers and doctors. They become bureaucrats. So they do a lot to help the Ottoman Empire out. However, they don't have full equality. It's not just them, right? It's all non-Muslims, right? Kind of the key things, though, that gives them a lack of full equality is they can only live in certain areas of the cities. They had to pay the jizya, right, which is the tax on non-Muslims. And then they couldn't hold top positions in the empire. Okay, which again this is not Jewish only, right? This is everybody that wasn't, that was not part of the Muslim community, right, in the Ottoman Empire. Very briefly, let's talk about women in the Ottoman Empire, and in particular, we need to talk about harem politics, right? So the harem is the home where the wives of the Sultan live, right? And so what we see a lot of times is that the wives and the concubines of a sultan will try to promote their own children as heir to the throne. And so it kind of creates a lot of backstabbing, backroom politics kind of stuff. Right. So what you see because of this is not necessarily the best ruler is going to rule. Right. It'll just be the son of the woman who is able to successfully maneuver themselves into position. And they talk about Roxolana, who they go through her whole backstory. I'm not going to focus too much on that. She's noted for her, she marries Suleiman. Her backstory is very interesting, though. She was a slave brought to Istanbul from Eastern Europe, right? And then Suleiman marries her, which is very rare, right? Especially considering she was not Muslim born, right? She converts to Islam. And then she commissions massive public works projects like the Suleymaniye, right? And then her son succeeds Suleiman, right? So he becomes the emperor. And then you see people, the viziers, complain about the sultanate of the women, that the women had too much power, right? But Roxolana's rise shows the potential influence that women can have on Ottoman society, right? Okay. Within the kind of social class structure, nothing unique about the Ottomans. You got merchants and artisans in the middle class. You got the peasants in the lower class. You have slaves, right? We see the Barbary pirates gain slaves for the Ottoman Empire, who are off the North African coast, who claim European slaves, capture Europeans as slaves in the Mediterranean, and sell them to the Sultan. We also see impressed sailors, right? Galley slaves as well. Nothing too different there. And very briefly with the Mughals, we see religious toleration practiced under Akbar, especially of the Hindu majority. Of course, after Akbar, that kind of goes away, and that helps lead to the decline of the Mughals. All right. In China, in the Ching Dynasty, which lasts for almost 300 years. Okay, so the Qing are not Chinese, or they're not Han Chinese. They're not the kind of main Chinese. They are Manchurian, right? They're Manchus. Oops, I misspelled that. Man, I am misspelling everything recently. The Manchus are in charge, and so they are less tolerant of Chinese culture than even the Mongols were. Right, and they're going to kind of show it. Right. There are some things they do, right? They put Manchus in charge of the government. They also force the Manchu Q hairstyle onto men, which is the long ponytail with almost a bald head. Other than that, right? So yeah, we also see, though, at the same time, we also see the civil service exam continue. Right, the Confucian philosophy continues. Right, and they recruit the indigenous Chinese, the main Chinese ethnic group known as the Han Chinese, to work in the government. Okay, but we do see a lot of conflicts between the Han and the Manchus. Right, we see massacres against the Han, even by Han defectors. Right, they listed out these two men, Li Chengdong and Liu Liangzhou, who massacre massive populations of Han Chinese on behalf of the Manchus. Right, so we have this situation where it's very similar to the Mongols. Right, where some things of Chinese culture are kept, but a lot of things are removed, and we also make sure that we see the Manchus kind of isolate themselves from the Han. Right. In Europe, we've talked about European hierarchies a lot. We've got the king, the nobles, and the priests, and then the middle class and the peasants. But what's going on right now is the power of the nobility versus the power of the monarchs. Right, that's kind of one of the big issues of this era, right? Which is going to really open up the nobles for some problems, right? Later on down the road. And in some places, England and in Netherlands in particular, we see the nobility gain more power, especially through one particular mechanism, the parliament. Right, the parliament becomes the home of nobles. It's usually not necessarily the middle class hasn't taken control of the parliament yet. They will eventually, but for right now, it's where the nobles are able to assert their power. And on top of that, we also see the Dutch had local governments as well. Okay. But they have to contend, the nobles here have to contend with the middle class that is rising, especially it's rising a lot because of the policies of the parliament. And then also the kind of radical religious groups, right? Like the Puritans, for example. Okay. Meanwhile, though, in France, right, the nobility loses power, especially after the Fronde, especially after Louis XIV and Cardinal Richelieu, right? They talk about the failed uprising in the mid 1600s. That is the Fronde that they were talking about. And then on top of that, they're also challenged by Enlightenment thinkers. Who kind of really don't like the nobles. And then they are mostly located in France, right? We really see the worm turn for the nobles as gunpowder, as cannons become more common, right? And so we see as gunpowder weapons become more common. The problem is they are too expensive for nobles to have. Right? So it gives the monarchs a pretty decided advantage over their subjects, and it even allows for them to kind of destroy fortresses as well, right? Or destroy castles of the kings or of the monarchs. I mean, goodness, of the nobles. Excuse me. Um, okay, so let's talk about the role of Jews in Europe. So we see Jews expelled from lots of places in Europe. They talked about Spain, especially kind of being a big place during the Inquisition by Ferdinand and Isabella, and there are a lot of Jews there. And the Jews that are forced to migrate out of there are now known as the Sephardic Jews, which is the with Sepharad being the the Hebrew term for Spain, right? And they would resettle all around the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Middle East in particular. The other kind of major group is the German Jews, which is the Ashkenazi. Right. So they were heavily under fire during the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries. But as we see with the scientific revolution and enlightenment of the 17th and 18th centuries, we start to see a lot less intolerance of other cultures, and especially the Jews. We see a decline in prejudice against the Jews, and they're kind of allowed to go back and live their lives in Europe. And especially important in banking and commerce, as they are kind of in charge of a lot of the banking structure of Europe, because for a very long time, Europeans could not charge interest rates, or excuse me, Christians could not charge interest rates. Netherlands sees a lot of Jews move there because they're quite tolerant, right? And so that's that. I'm not going to talk about Russia. It's the same. We just talked about it. It's the nobles it's the boyars. It is the Tsar, and then the boyars, and then the serfs with a somewhat of a. And there's some sort of middle class, right? The merchants, and then the serfs who are controlled by the boyars, right? Yeah, nothing more to say there. Lastly, Latin America. Latin America is very unique in that it is it's not totally unique. It's very similar to India, but Latin America has a race-based hierarchy, social hierarchy, and that race-based social hierarchy also is an economic hierarchy, right? Which is very similar to India. Now, we typically talk about the Indian caste system as being all about, what kind of job you have, but it's actually also very much based on the color of your skin, and that is the same case down here in the Latin America. In fact, it's called the casta system, the castas, which is where the term caste system comes from in India, right? So at the top of the Latin American structure, we got the peninsulares, which are Iberian-born. Okay. And then we have next up we have the mestizos, or excuse me, I'm sorry, I forgot one. The Creoles are next, which are Iberian but born in the Americas. And then next we have, so we kind of have a big drop off here. We have the mestizos, right, which are indigenous plus European. And then we have the mulattoes, which are African plus European. And then we have the Zambos, which are indigenous and African. And then, of course, we have the indigenous and the African slaves as well, right? And then you can't really move up except by intermarriage, and the people in the bottom layers tended to have to pay higher taxes, even though they couldn't afford them, which is the same as many places like France at this point, right? So yeah, that's the quick overview of social classes in this time period. That's going to do it for me. We'll see you in the wrap-up.